Thanks a lot, Francisco, and thanks everyone for joining in. I'll quickly introduce myself and then I have a few slides prepared, so we'll cover that just after. So as Francisco already mentioned, so I'm the co-founder and CEO of Threado. Started building it a couple of years back. And my background or my introduction to community building happened in the previous role. So I spent close to a decade at Zomato as the VP marketing there. And I consider myself as accidentally discovering community building. So we had a very strong content and community-led approach to going about establishing Zomato across markets. And that was my first introduction to community building when it was not a buzzword. This was from 2010 to 2016. I was working with about 35 community builders on the team across markets. And it would take anywhere between 6 to 18 months to build a highly engaging community, which was hosted on our product itself. So we were a social a discovery platform for restaurants in the city, right? And that was the formative years of Zomato, and we heavily relied on content and community, user-generated content coming together to build the backbone of Zomato, right? So I moved on from Zomato in 2019 and started Threado primarily because community builders need better tools, and I think community building today is it's a must-have, especially when you see in a world where products look similar in any category. Products are commoditized. So any business that is thinking about how to build in network effects or help customers add value to each other. So community is the way to go. And community builders do a lot to actually build or ensure that this network effect builds over time. And they deserve all the unfair advantages, and we want to help empower them and also champion community builders, right? So that's why we started Threado. And Threado essentially is a command center for community builders. It helps you, and we work with communities on Slack, Discord, and other platforms similar to Tribe. We are yet to integrate Tribe, but hopefully we're planning to do it soon. But essentially what Threado does is to help you save time and automate your operational tasks. And get you insights which are actionable, and you can take those actions and set those automated rules on Threado, so you can focus more on the actual community building itself, right? So that's Threado. We just went live today, announced our fundraise seed round as well today. So feel free to check out on Threado.com. You should be able to try it out for free, and we love feedback. But today, I wanted to spend time talking about community-led growth itself and share learnings from what we saw and how we built the playbook at Zomato and what we've observed other companies do. So let me get straight into it. I'll just share screen and would love to take on questions from you once. Feel free to put it on chat and we can cover it once I've covered the slides. Yeah. So I briefly touched upon this, what really happening is over the last 3 decades, organizations have moved from a sales-led approach to product-led approach to now community sort of becoming core to the way companies or organizations think about building network effects, right? And primarily, the traditional forms of marketing or engagement are becoming less effective. And usually, I think 2010s was largely about social media, which are not platforms that you own. And you are as organizations, you're fighting for real estate against other players. And this real estate costs more as time progresses, right? And there's also a user fatigue towards this. So it's not really effective as well. So most of the products, this is what the retention is. And the traditional forms of marketing are getting really ineffective to drive engagement or retention for them, right? Which is where community sort of comes in, because the network effects are super powerful. It does take time to build these network effects, but community can help drive stickiness and product adoption. It also helps lower acquisition cost and support costs as well. And generally, I think we think it's the most sustainable way to think about building a company, right? The easier answer is like, inorganic growth, but inorganic growth doesn't necessarily stick. So it's important to have like an organic flywheel that's built. I think community is a great way to think about how to build that, or like, from a scaling point of view as well. So traditionally, brands, products would or like traditional forms of marketing is largely like one to many, which is there is an exchange of value that happens between the brand and the customer, and it's more of a broadcast across customers, right? And like community flips it. Basically, it's about how can you create a space and also design a mechanism where your customers can add value to each other, and the more they do, it actually benefits the brand itself, like, through higher retention, engagement, lifetime value of customer, organic word of mouth, and lowers churn cost, acquisition cost, and also customer support cost, right? So yeah, at fundamental level, it's about thinking how can each customer add value to each other. If that is possible to do, then you have a case for building a community where then the next step is to think about how to create a space for them to engage, and what mechanisms can you deploy to help them add value to each other, essentially, right? So I think this is sort of self-evident, but like, yeah, it's very customer centric. It's a very organic way to like think about growth, rather than the earlier version where you build a product and then you take it to your customers, and that's where inorganic growth sort of comes in. Here you're organically, like, you're building a community, you're understanding the pain points, understanding what value are they seeking, and then you can build it, and this compounds over time, right? And there are several examples of it. I'll cover a few of them, but this is essentially the flywheel that we experienced at Zomato during the formative years. So Zomato is a restaurant discovery platform, right, and a online ordering platform today. It's the largest online ordering platform that exists in like Asia, or even like, when you look at the numbers globally. Between 2010 to 2016, we were actually a restaurant discovery platform. We positioned ourselves as a social network for restaurant discovery. So they were foodies who can share their experiences and connect with each other and see recommendations from their network. And for us, this flywheel was super important. So at Zomato, we our team got the restaurant content. So any city, like, you would find all the listings, the menus, and so on. And then users would share their reviews. So that formed the user-generated content that came in. The higher the quality of the content, like, it got us more users coming onto the platform, and whether it was through SEO or multiple factors, we'd built in mechanisms within the product for members to connect with each other. So the moment you come in, you get recommendations to follow other foodies, and you can connect with them, share reviews, and sort of like interact on the platform itself. The more that happens, that led to more content being generated, which led to more members, right? So the first few years of Zomato, we focused on growing this flywheel. It would take anywhere between 6 to 18 months to get this going. And once, like, we see that organically this community is engaging with itself, then, like, it would branch out into use cases where we could also introduce transactions, which is online ordering, for example. And the more users transact on the platform, that drives retention, which again gets like more users on the platform, right? So this was the entire life cycle of how we thought about building Zomato in the early years. And the same principle can be applied to like other organizations too. So Notion, for example, it's a SaaS product, but it's a consumer SaaS product. This is a slightly outdated slide, but they have more than like 100K members on the Notion subreddit. I think, this must be close to 200K right now. They've been doubling this number every 6 months, and adding about 400 or 500 new members every day organically. These are all of them who are coming in are potential users and maybe even potential paid customers for Notion going ahead, right? And Notion does a great job of like a Notion. They have this ambassador program that allows for this bottoms up approach to growth, like, community-led growth to take place very organically, right? So they empower the community, allow like, and like allow them to like sort of grow from there. So there are multiple Notion ambassadors across like markets that help do that. But the same flywheel is what we see here as well. Um, so Notion, as you know, so they have multiple communities, by the way. So they have a couple of communities on Slack, and there's I think like on like forum and Discord as well. So people like in the community share templates, which is core to Notion's growth, right? So every template helps more Notion users to use Notion. So the community comes together to share these templates, which gets more usage or more members to use Notion. And then like more members coming into Notion gets more members into the community who then interact with each other, and that results in more content, right? So that's the basic flywheel that happens that at Notion, and that leads to member growth, which eventually, like, because Notion is a freemium product, like means that it's sort of the top of the funnel for them. And that leads to like, paying customers, and paying customers drive more retention, right? So that's the power of community-led growth. When you think about it, like what value can each member add to the others? In Notion's case, it's so flexible that you can use it for so many multiple use cases. And on Notion's onboarding, they've made it super simple to actually use templates. And that's the nature of how they built it. And they actually champion people who go dig deeper into Notion and they create custom templates. And then the community sort of comes together to actually, celebrate small wins or like share templates that have been working. And you'd see this on Twitter being shared elsewhere, and all of that leads to like more members coming into the community, right? And eventually becoming customers of Notion. So just an example of how to think of community-led growth from a brand's perspective. There isn't a framework that works in every brand's context. I try to put together elements that you can think about when it comes to community building, how to get started, and going from 0 to 1 and scaling from there. But like I mentioned earlier, for Zomato, it would take anywhere between 6 to 18 months for us to get the community going, depending on the market. So whether it be Melbourne, London, Johannesburg, or like, Delhi NCR, depending on how the market is, like, and different factors, it would take anywhere between 6 to 18 months to like get the flywheel going and organically growing from there on. And the 0 to 1 phase involves doing a lot of things that don't scale. In the first phase, it's about like meeting one-on-ones with members, thinking about what are the areas where you can add value. Sorry. And then going from there and like enabling connections and creating these experiences where people can connect with each other and add value as well, right? But there are 5 broad things which have worked for us in the past, and what I see other communities do as well. The first one is finding and connecting with your audience, right? So super important to know where can you, like, if you have a purpose clear for the community, like it's important to understand where can you find them. Second is how do you add value, or how do you discover, or how do you think about adding value to members? And then think about how can you enable connections so that members can add value to each other, right? And that's more into how do you design a space where people can connect with each other, use platforms like Tribe, for example, and so on. Lastly, like it's not just about the tool, but how can you think about driving participation? And when you get to the stage, that 0 to 1 stage, how can you then scale from there by empowering members further, right? So these are the steps which I think I've seen and also experienced like at Zomato, which worked for us. So I'll just break this down the next few minutes. But like I said, there may be parts of this which are relevant for your community. Not all of them might apply. But this is like a compilation of everything that we've seen, right? But the first step is to really understand the purpose of the community, like who are you building it for, who's the persona, almost like how startups also function. You want to know who you're building it for. So that clarity helps to understand the persona's ambitions, like what do they want to accomplish, what's stopping them, how do they tackle it today, all of that. Like what do they really care about, what values do they care about as well, right? So if once you have this clear, the finding your audience part of it becomes very easy, right? So the first step is like find and connect your audience, but once you define this, it becomes easy to understand where like your members hang out. Is it a Reddit or like a subreddit, or is it a Slack community? At the start, you will not have your own community, but it doesn't mean that you can't add value to community of members, right? So you can go to other Slack groups, other forums, and around the topic of your interest, see what's being discussed and start contributing there, right? And genuinely without and do it genuinely without like selling anything or getting them into your community or anything like that, right? So it's purely like around this topic, you have a point of view, you have something to add, and you go and start adding value, and that will compound over time. The more you do it, the more people will interact with you and are likely to be curious about what are you building as well, right? So it's important to go where members hang out, start adding value there. And when you are starting your community, start with a small group. The more you add value, and then people will start like really connecting with you. Start with a small group and try and understand how you can set up a community where they can add value to each other, right? For us at Zomato, how we did this, let's say we were to launch in a new market, like Melbourne, we would actually meet like one-on-one the first couple of months. Our team would be meeting at least 150 to 200 users who are active on other platforms, on Twitter, talking about restaurants or like their own blogs. We meet them one-on-one, try and understand them, like, at a personal level, what do they really value? What are the pain points they're facing in that market? And then start building connections between them. So like, let's say somebody is interested, I'm just saying like, could be like wine or something like that. So we create these experiences where members can connect with each other, explore the local eateries together, right? And that's how we thought about forming the community, like in the early days, right? So it was never about getting them onto Zomato to write a review. That happened as an organic outcome, but it was more important for us to really connect with them to understand what did they want to solve, like what problem were they facing, how can we help solve it, and try and address those problems, right? This was just a reaction, like from a brand's perspective, like one of the things we realized was that most of the brands don't do this. This is just a response from one of the, I think he was number 2 on Urban Spoon as a blogger for years. And Zomato had acquired Urban Spoon in 2014 or 2015. And we set up the market there. We started meeting the most active users on Urban Spoon, and they were completely surprised that a brand would actually come down to that market and meet them in person. And while like they never had interacted with a person before, so with Urban Spoon, their interaction was via support, which is most of the cases it's always like for support you would have to reach out via, through an email ID or a chat window. But here they were actually meeting someone in person, right? So I think just the act of the brand lending a hand, like saying that, hey, like we are here, we'd love to know more about you, and just want to start adding value in this market, right? So that was a completely different approach. I think most brands stay behind email IDs or like websites. They don't have a persona. But this sort of flipped it to, and brands became like human, basically, right? So it's a very human way to connect with people, and that was the first thing that we realized, that if you really understand the persona well, know where they hang out, understand them personally on what are their pain points, how to solve them, and then reach out to them. That's a long way from what most brands do today, right? Same thing I got. This is a LinkedIn message from a user who I had met in and she messaged this, I think, in 2018 or so. Right. So she clearly remembers this one incident where we'd met. I think she shared some feedback, and then we invited her to office to discuss it. All of these interactions go a long way in building communities, right? So it's like a drop in the ocean, but it sort of adds up in the end. And it's great to actually really meet the users and start interacting and getting to know them, right? The second part is like linked to this, like how do you start adding value? um, and I think like you can do it in many ways. I think from this is where it comes to like, knowing them personally and onboarding them into the product or like into the community, rather than having a spray and pray approach, right? So if you know the person well, what are their pain points, you can then onboard them in a way that maybe it's like, hey, you should meet these couple of people. Maybe these restaurants are most relevant for you. Maybe these events are like most relevant for you, or these channels. Could be anything, but it should like, basically personalizing it for their context is super important, right? Second is a welcoming experience. For us at Zomato, like I mentioned, the community connected on our platform, right? So there was no Slack or anything else. Zomato had built-in features where you could interact with others. So we used to make it a point that if somebody had taken the pain to come onto the platform and write a review, our like at least in the initial days when there's not a lot of traffic on the website, we like as a team would respond to them, just thanking them for and acknowledging that, hey, like thanks a lot for writing a review. This is great. Like, or just acknowledge that, hey, we are here. This is great. And that's amazing. Like even in Slack, when you go to a community and post an introduction, it's always great to see others respond to it, whether it's a reaction or a reply from someone. It just shows that the community is alive, and it's not a black box, right? And that I think is one of the key things, like in terms of activating a community, the first experience is super important. So if you can personalize it and really get them to value in the first few steps, that has a very long-term impact on retention. Like, will they come back the next time seeking value for the same thing that they're trying to solve, right? Third is content. So content is super critical, I think, like especially in the early stages. And one thing that not a lot of brands or communities think of as like curation. Curation can be really powerful to solve problems of the persona, right? And to also get the engagement going. So we've been following that at Threado as well. So our product, which we rolled out today, but like for 7-8 months, the product was in beta. It was not accessible by community builders. But we made it a point over the last 8 months that we keep curating resources for community builders, keep dropping certain tools that we built for specific use cases from time to time. And all of this was adding value to community builders, and then that helped us connect with them on a regular basis, right? So the content can also solve pain points. So one of the things we follow is that we don't necessarily have to build a product to solve a pain point, right? So a framework, a curated list of best practices, all of these can help people solve what they're trying to achieve, or like the pain points that they're facing. So this is super powerful. I think like not many do it. Content, side projects, all of that can be leveraged to actually adding a lot of value, especially in the 0 to 1 stage. And then like once engagement starts coming in, you can start connecting people, helping them connect with the relevant. So this is what we followed at Zomato. Like we used to do one-on-one meetings with, let's say, 150 to 200 members, and mentally and we note down, these are the people, these are the interests, and started making cohorts of them. So we would then start creating experiences for 10 to 15 members with similar interests, right? So maybe it's fine dining, maybe it's a cafe, like a walk which covers like 3 to 4 cafes, or a pub crawl, and so on. So we used to enable connections depending on the interests of people, and that started getting the community together from an offline experience standpoint, right? The last two are more from a support context. Like for example, this was purely from being super approachable and not like being behind as a brand, and that adds a lot of value because and again that links to like providing top-notch support. So we have a Slack community for Threado at the moment, right? And for us, the support is super important, especially in the early days. We want to be like literally responding back in a minute, and that people appreciate that we are super approachable. If there's an issue, we solve it, and that starts like building trust. That this is a place like a community for them to come and share their problems and it gets resolved very quickly. The more that happens, people will be open to sharing their problems more, and then others, basically it gives others an opportunity to help solve as well, right? So that's pretty much on adding value. And few things which you can do to amplify this further is making it super easy for members to navigate or seek help in the community, right? Versus it's almost like if you're going to a party and just there are like n number of people in front of you, but there's nobody welcoming you and guiding you what to do next. It becomes difficult to like be a part of what's happening there. So just having a great welcoming experience, making it easy for members to navigate, maybe a couple of connections, like depending on your understanding of the member, goes a long way. Also helps to like co-create content, which we're talking about, like relevant content here with the community, and encourage them to share more. There are communities which do this really well, like a part of like Lenny's community on Slack. I think so that's for paying customers of this Office newsletter, and the highest value content that lands in my inbox is probably his weekly curation of community discussions, right? So that in itself is so valuable, just to read perspectives of different product managers, product leaders, that I'd pay for like being part of the community for just that content, right? Lastly, making high quality introductions is super important, and allowing people to also search and connect with other members, right? So that you don't be the bottleneck. Let people connect with others and start adding value to each other. Which comes to the third point, like enabling connections. So this is about thinking about how to design a space where people can engage with each other, right? So, and there's no, and I firmly believe that community, like how engaged it is or how valuable it is, does not depend on the tool, right? And each tool has its own purpose. There are a lot of things that you need to do to get the community together, but it's important to think about what kind of value is important, right? So, for example, Slack and Discord are more real-time engagement related. So, and they're for different personas, right? Like Slack is for working professionals. Discord, you'd see like gaming communities or DevRel communities there, Web3 communities on Discord, but it can be really noisy, and depending on the size of the community there, right? Tribe, as a platform, and other forums, they're great for multiple reasons too, because you are able to discover content more easily. That's valuable. It's slightly asynchronous, so it's great for context like for support. Also, if I'm likely to be searching problems on like Google. So like there's SEO value. If I search for a problem, maybe a link from Tribe comes up, and then like I land upon the community. So there's also a growth element there. So the different use cases, depending on what you're trying to solve, you can choose the platform. But enabling connections is all about thinking, once you have a platform, how do you design it in a way that people can start having conversations and connecting with each other, right? Think about the channels, think about the categories that you want to create, the prompts that would help people to open up and like start sharing, and think about how you can do one-on-one connections as well, right? So connections happen by design, like through the platform, and also intentionally, where you want to do one-on-one connections or a group, like a mastermind group and so on, right? This was like by design, like, this was the community experience on Zomato back then, where there was a local feed of what people are sharing around restaurants and food. People can like it or like follow people here or comment on it and interact with each other. And then we had a leaderboard of sorts for each area, right? So this enabled interactions from within our product back then. Last one is driving participation. Once you enable these connections, once you design a space where people can connect with each other, how do you like think about engagement? And this is where we currently have like 200 communities on Threado. Like Threado basically is not an engagement platform itself, but we work with platforms like Tribe, Slack, and others, right? And so we have for 200 communities with 1 million members. Most of them are highly engaged communities, but they all went through this phase, and the 0 to 1 phase, where the most important question is, how do I drive participation, right? And this entire framework is to help communities take off the ground. And driving participation is one of the key problems that community builders want to solve, right? So, and this is a phase, the 0 to 1 phase, where you have to do things that don't scale, right? So for example, ensuring every message has a response to it. In Zomato's context, it was if there was a review that came in, we are replying back with an acknowledgement, which sends a signal to them that, hey, okay, this platform works. Like I posted something, somebody acknowledged that, okay, this review, they've received it, right? So it's not a black box. The same thing happens on Slack. You posted an introduction, or somebody posted an introduction in your community, try and reply back as quickly as possible. And acknowledge, or if somebody has asked a question, try and get to the answer if you know the answer, or connect someone who might know the answer as quickly as possible, right? Sorry. Second is creating spaces for conversations, right? And here I would say, like, think of it as how internal Slack workspaces are also designed. Like for our internal Slack workspace, we have a channel for shout outs to celebrate small wins of the team. We have a channel for memes and fun. We have a channel for expressing gratitude. So, and I've seen similar kind of an approach at communities like On Deck. It's about how do you design a space so that people don't have to think about, hey, okay, I want to post this, but I don't know, is the general channel appropriate to post it on, right? So make it super easy for them to really get started with posting whatever they want, and encourage them to do that as well, right? So a lot of times, like people, there's this, initial stages, it'll feel like a ghost town because members come in and but they don't post. But I think it's about helping them add value, right? And it might be let's say I have a one-on-one with a member, and the member asks me a question. I would encourage them to post it on a particular channel, and that's what we do for our product as well. If somebody has posted a bug and send that to me in a private DM, I'd recommend them, why don't you post it in the community? Someone might answer, or we'll pick it up on priority there. So get that ball rolling by doing things that don't scale. The last few things are like how you can think about highlighting behavior that you want to see. Like if you want to see a highly engaged community, makes sense to highlight in a spotlight the most active contributors from time to time, right? If you want like community builders or like the community members to take more ownership, then initiate community-led events. Let them also create channels or like categories on the platform and sort of own that experience. Guide them, but like give the ownership to them to like execute things in small ways, right? And it's also important that you are moderating the community to ensure that it's space for people where they can be vulnerable, they can be themselves. If there's any inappropriate behavior that automatically results in a bad experience and people stop like, they would think twice before being themselves, right? So that's not an ideal place to be in. So moderation is super important as you think about the communities going from 0 to 1. The second aspect to it is like thinking about certain rituals, and this could be something very unique for your community as well. So like, either it's stand-ups or there are communities who have designed mechanism like 100 days of no code, for example. It's bite-sized learning that happens every day for 100 days, and you learn like no code tools, and they encourage you to sort of learn in public, like, and it can be anything like a small tweet that you're posting every day about what you learned. And that's a ritual that the community follows, right? So it could be as simple, it's like a signature ritual which the community follows that helps drive participation of the community itself. Lastly, thinking about how, so I learned this at OnDeck. They do a phenomenal job of this, is to think about events and how to think like basically collision of people, like could be one-on-one, one-to-many, which are like fireside chats. You could have many-to-many as well. So like these are like mastermind groups where you have 5 to 6 people meeting on a regular basis. Or you could have like all hands events, check-ins. So the different formats, but events as a way to like drive participation is super important. And you can do that in multiple ways. But it's a powerful way to like drive participation. Some of these we covered, but like celebrating small wins, giving shout outs to members of the team, small things. Like we used to do this at Zomato, and I think we do this even today, where each city, like the community manager, would send handwritten notes to like people, depending on, if they took the effort to write an amazing review or so on, just delight them in ways that feels very human, right? And I think, like just be there, be very approachable, and that's the kind of approach that really works, that people who've joined the community want to solve a problem, or they're seeking help in some area. So if you're if they find someone who is willing to listen and help, that goes a long way in encouraging them to participate in the community as well. The last is more for if you move from 0 to 1, how do you think about going from 1 to 10 and then 10 to 100, right? And that's where empowering members comes in. I don't have a slide dedicated for this, but think of this as there's always this 1-9-90 rule in a community where 1% of them are most active and creating experiences and content. How can you make them your champions? And it could be either a formal ambassador program. So there are like, communities who make it a lot more formal, where you become an ambassador. There are certain things that you're responsible for. You're given that recognition in the community, and you're sort of a designated expert of sorts. And there are also very informal ways where you're empowered. Like, for example, Notion, I think Notion ambassadors, they are the ambassadors meet on a regular basis. They discuss, and they helped with like, templates and whatnot on the Notion like product side of things, but they're given freedom to sort of go hold webinars in their markets and sort of grow the community for that chapter, right? Similarly, Startup Grind has a similar approach. So the chapter directors run Startup Grind in different locations, and they meet together on a regular basis to discuss what's the Startup Grind's like, plan of action for the next few months, and then how can they roll out initiatives locally, right? So let go of control, but like guide the empowered members and let them sort of take it from there, so that you can then scale from 1 to 10. And last is, like measuring impact is outside of this framework, but like for everything, like measure, and what you don't measure, you can't grow. So keep measuring how things are growing, and keep fine tuning these aspects towards the outcome that you're trying to drive, right? And it's not just metrics. I would say check in personally, measure community NPS, measure engagement and retention metrics for sure. And lastly, like, to grow, I think, like, be relevant in other communities and build in public, essentially, to grow the community. Yeah. That's pretty much it. Would love to take questions from here on. Francisco, if you're there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you so much. That was really, really great. I do have a couple questions from the audience. The first one was came in the chat from Jen, and she asked, is this geared towards a community that is focusing on marketing a specific product, or is it this more broad approach?
Yeah, no, this is not specific to marketing a specific product. I think this is a broad approach in general. So any of these, like, we've seen this aspects of several of these things like be applied to On Deck as well, right? Which is a community of professionals connecting with each other, right? But elements of these we've applied to Zomato as well, right? Like where not all of them would be super relevant to Zomato. Like we didn't do a lot of these fireside chats or mastermind groups. That's more relevant to like networking related communities, right? But then we did a lot of the things on finding and connecting with the audience, enabling connections, creating those experiences, and so on. So yeah, it's a broad framework, I would say. You can pick and choose from given the context.
Awesome. There is another question. This one's from an anonymous attendee. How do you recommend adding people into a gated community, like a private Slack channel, in a thoughtful way to ensure that members are there for the right reasons? Example, I see some communities have members fill out a Google Sheet and the admin will then add them in after reviewing the form.
Yeah. Yes. So I think especially when you're starting out, it's important to get the right set of community members together in the sense that like I talked about initially, that it's important to know the persona that you're building the community for. So and when you start, it's important to start small, because the flip side is you can get 1,000 people into a Discord server or like tribe community or anywhere, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the quality of engagement is going to be high, right? So at the start, you want people to come together, feel that this is a place for them. So it's important that they can connect with others and say that, hey, okay, this I'm connecting with someone who is facing a similar problem or is in the same journey as I'm going through, and I can be myself here because that will allow them to like exchange or like share their experiences, right? Which is why I think at least at the start, it's great to think about why. Two questions here, like why do you want to join the community, and what do you want to get out of it, and what value can you add to the community, right? So these two questions help you understand, is this member great to get on board?
Awesome.
I think there's a follow-up question there. Yeah.
Yeah. How could this action plan work in a marketplace like Amazon when there is no big team to support?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the marketplace context. Yeah, so that right now, okay, I'll take another example, like similar to Amazon. So I've seen a community which does this. So it's Freshworks essentially, right? So they're a SaaS platform. They have a community called Refresh, and they have users of the product on the free plan, paid plans, and so on, right? And they use the community, and the main use case of the community is that because they don't have a big team on support, they direct members to go to the community so that you can post a question and someone else in the community who's facing a similar problem or has solved it before can answer it, right? So in a marketplace as well, if you have a forum and the customer is using a product, if they can go ahead and post the question there, somebody else who's solved it before is going to answer, right? Now that works great in like a forum like platform, right? Slack, you will need to send an invite and so on, but a forum, like it's great to from a support context where people can just come and post a question. If it's legit, like don't let it be there. If it's inappropriate, you can moderate it, and then like someone from the community can answer, right? I think Francisco can add, because I think Tribe has a lot of examples where companies have these forums for like support use cases. So yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned FreshBooks because I actually built that community. That's where I come from. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you want to understand what the value of the community is. What we understood there is that people had knowledge to help each other, so we enabled those type of interactions, and you almost act like just as a gatekeeper of those connections, and people start helping each other, and they're going to depart. A lot of the times they're going to depart the initial need, but you are creating that environment, so that always reflects back to you. It's like you were saying at the beginning, right? It's that circle of interactions, and when you start igniting those, undoubtedly it'll come back to you, and you may think like, well, we're departing from what we're trying to do. This is no longer customer support for my product, but you are encouraging, and you said this like many times, like you are addressing needs of an audience, and that is always the secret of an engaged community. Is like you are continuously engaging the needs and feeding into those. So I do have a few more questions that are coming. What is the ability to scale in additional services like video chat? I believe this is more of a product question, right?
Yeah, let me just, this is screen share. Or the ability to scale in additional services. Can you elaborate on the question a bit more? Is this related to the platform or?
Yeah, while she does that, I do have a quick question for you. There's a number you threw at the beginning. It's like it took Zomato anywhere between 6 to 18 months to grow and like kick off a community. And sometimes that not everyone, and especially in marketing teams, you may not have as a community builder that sort of leeway. So a lot of patience obviously is a factor. But what are some of those quick wins that you can see at the beginning, so you can kind of continue justifying like, hey, this is working, we're starting to see movement? Like, what are some milestones that you can use when going back to the rest of your team to say that we should keep going this way?
Yeah, sure. So when I said like 6 to 18 months for it to organically work, it would basically reach a stage where members are connecting with each other organically without the community builder being there, right? So like I said, in the initial days when somebody writes a review, we would acknowledge it by posting ourselves. The time when we see that, hey, okay, let's say you wrote a review on Zomato and somebody else is appreciating it, we know that the community is starting to work. Right. So for us, which then means we have to track some of these metrics beforehand as indicators, which would be number of active contributors on the platform and how many contributions are being made. All right. So that there's a business outcome, although it's not a direct linkage always. So like we're not going into the one-on-one or the group discussions, or experiences, expecting people to write reviews, because that would actually deter people from like the platform. But for us to measure, is this working? We sort of have to look at, is the direction going where we expect it to, right? And some markets it might take a lot of time because either the market is too crowded. Like for example, for us, there are so many other platforms or like players solving the same problem, and it takes time to build these connections, right? So yeah, I'd say there has to be some KPI which you should measure as a North Star metric. For us, it was active contributors and the contributions per contributor as well that we were looking at. Yeah.
And to add to that, I think also, there's instances where you may have a theory or a hypothesis of what the community is. And as you start putting it out there, you realize very quickly that is not at all what that is, but you start discovering what is. So there is, I think that's why you were giving that timeline, right? Like there's a lot of experimentation at the beginning where you have to try, but it's important that you try those things, because you can't just leave it in theory. You have to apply them and start trying things until you find the route, and then the organic growth will definitely start.
Correct.
Related to that, Michelle asks, as we begin a community, are there any good people to target as first members when the community is small, or is there an ideal number of people to start a community with?
You can start with like 2 to 3 people also, I think. So even like meeting on a regular basis, let's say weekly, 3 of like, let's say this Zoom call, we add like, both of us, let's say we're meeting and then a third person comes in and then, bring in one more person. So that's a community that's being formed. So there's no ideal number as such. Like I think 3, like basically from 3 onwards, it starts increasing. So because people can start adding value to each other there, right? So yeah, start small and then build momentum and start slowly expanding is how to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would target the people that are already following you in some capacity. Like find those fans, find the other channels that you're using, like on your social media, on your reviews. Like find the people that are already engaged with you and invite them. And and that's where you start, because they're already engaged, they already like you. So like that's the best way to start, and they will start singing your praises, and that's the network effect that starts building.
And which is where I think like knowing where the members hang out is super important. So it could be like a subreddit or could be a Twitter community or Quora. But the moment you start adding value there, you will get your first members from those interactions, right? Yeah.
Amazing. All right, so we want to be mindful of the time, so I have 3 more minutes, but I want to say, first of all, thank you, Pramod. That was super insightful. I was live tweeting, and like it was just great insight after great insight after great insight. So I'm sure we'll digest it, and we'll watch this over and over, because there's a lot of great nuggets that you share with us. We'll share this with you as well. There'll be a recording. You'll get an email with a link, but you can also find it in our community. So you can join us at community.tribe.so, where you'll find this and all the webinars that we do. Please give us some feedback. Let us know what you like, what you didn't like, what you want to talk about next, so we can continue curating content that fits your needs. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending, and until the next time, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Pramod, again. And
thanks a lot, Francisco. Yeah.
Have a lovely day, evening, night, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. You're welcome. Bye.